Welcome to Practice Disrupted, a podcast where we find ways to create new solutions to current challenges while elevating the value of architects. I'm your host, Evelyn Lee, an architect who spans tech as an angel investor, startup advisor, and founder of Practice of Architecture. Whether you're a seasoned architect or just starting in the field, this podcast is your gateway to think differently about the role architects play within our global community. Hello, Disruptors. Welcome to this week's episode of Practice Disrupted. Today, we're kicking off Season 10, where we are counting down the last 20 episodes to 200 episodes on Practice Disrupted. Over the years, we've interviewed more than 225 guests, exploring the evolving landscape of architecture, business, and innovation. For the season opener, I'm switching things up a bit. Instead of being the interviewer, I'm sharing the mic with Michele Grace Hottel, an architect, advocate, and host of I've Never Met a Woman Architect Before. Michele has spent decades shaping the profession through her practice, Michele Grace Hottel Architect, as well as her leadership roles at the AIA, CRAN, and the California Architects Board. She's also a dedicated voice in the conversation around attainable housing and the future of residential design. Together, we're reflecting on how we started our podcasts, memorable conversations that shaped our perspectives, and where we see the profession heading next. It's a conversation about growth, impact, and the stories that don't always make headlines, but have changed the direction of our careers. Let's dive in.
Hi, Evelyn.
Hi, Michele. Thank you for joining me and for interviewing me and actually just having a conversation on my podcast over here at Practice Disrupted.
Yes, and I had you on my podcast. I've never met a woman architect before during COVID.
Yes. Did you start your podcast during COVID as well?
No, I'm not a COVID podcaster. I started it in 2018, July 2018.
Yeah, I feel like you're like one of the first architects I knew that like really dived into podcasting. What made you interested in doing it?
You know, Evelyn, I think that, like Bob Borson was he was going to start one, but I didn't even really know at the same time, but we both started it after the AIA conference in New York. So I had gone there. I decided that I was going to interview 5 people, and it was and 5 people that I knew from the AIA conference. And so that's kind of what I decided to do. And I wanted them short, like these short little podcasts, because I was still thinking that people would listen to podcasts, that they would listen on their commute. And so I was trying to keep them to like 15 minutes. And then during COVID, right, we were all stuck at home, and all of a sudden they were becoming an hour long. And so now they're about an hour long. Yeah. So some of the first ones are like 15 minutes, and then most of them are like an hour.
So are you a big consumer of podcasts yourself?
No, and Evelyn, I don't even know if I'd listened to that many podcasts when I decided to start. And when I started it, I just did them. I did voice memo on my iPhone. And then I just embedded them into my blog, because I had started my blog in about 2014. I'd started blogging in 2014. And so then I just included in these blogs, and then a couple of years ago, I actually got, a hosting site, and then I transferred all of them over to the hosting site. So when did you start?
It was definitely a COVID era podcast, but I think the things that we started addressing were just things that we had seen collectively in the industry, having been involved in volunteer leadership, with the AIA for so long, and having come out of business school, both of us at various different points of our lives, and thinking about architecture from a practice standpoint, a business standpoint of, I was very much engaged in employee experience and in the tech industry, and Janine was building her own practice she was still finding her way. I think she is okay with me admitting that like her practice continues to pivot as she focuses on what she's most passionate about. But mentorship and leadership development has always been kind of core to what she does. I felt better having a co-host at the time. Janine's welcome back to the platform. whenever she wants. I just say that she's taking a nice break, and I'm not quite sure how long it is. I mean, I'm kind of excited about season 10 because they say like once you get past 5 podcasts, like only a very small percentage, right, of podcasters get past 5, let alone 20 episodes.
Really?
Yeah, you're closing in on 70. We're closing in on 200 at the end of this season, which is incredible. And I was going back through my database of guests, and I'm glad I get to add you to that number now. And, over 200 episodes, 220 by the end of the season, and then 225 guests. Inspirational conversations for me. I hope they've been as inspirational and aspirational for our listeners. I've learned so much through this experience. Do you find that you often learn through interviewing and podcasting?
Yes. Yeah, I definitely do. When I met Tom Kundig, I always thought of like some of these architects, and I just kind of was in awe of them. I mean, of course, there were people that, you and I were both in LA and, in the 90s, right? Or you went to SciArc, right? So you're kind of like, known all these people, and sometimes you have a good relationship with them. Sometimes you don't. And Tom is just like such an easygoing guy. And I can, I can just email him and say like, hey, what is the name of your new book? Or like, oh, can I like include you in this? And he's like, oh yeah, sure. And he gets back like, oh yeah, sure, Michele. It's like really nice to have those relationships with these people that have a very successful practice and also kind of like see that, that they're real people. And, he's like a real person. He has real lives. He loves to mountain climb, it's like, so it's.
I just left a conference where Brooke Scarpa was keynoting, and
oh yeah.
They're another group that I feel so honored to just be able to kind of pick up the phone and, talk to Larry or Angie or Jeff whenever I feel like I need to have a conversation with that incredible caliber of architect. So, yeah.
And those were people that, it's like I used to work with Angie at Appleton's office. So Steve and Angie worked together for a while. And then I came in when they had like a lot of work there. And that was when Larry was with another partner. We were all in LA. They lived like several blocks away from us. And, we knew them from back then.
So it was interesting because in preparing for this podcast, here is my interview hat again, to like you talk about how you get pushback from the quote unquote more traditional architects, which to me is ironic because I feel like what you do is so much more traditional than what I do. So where are you getting the pushback from architects saying like, oh, you're not an architect?
Well, actually, it's kind of funny because when I was at the AIA CRAN symposium in Seattle in September, I had an editor of a magazine like ask me if I practiced architecture or if the podcast was everything. And I'm like, no, the podcast isn't everything. I have an architecture practice, and I had actually written an article for that magazine and it was in there, and some of my work was published also in that same article. So I don't know whether it's because, also I went, right, like I kind of have that tradition that we started that is now very prevalent where, women, they give birth, if they're not in partnership with their husband, their spouse, like some other partner, I felt like I wanted to have my own firm. It's like financially, it didn't make sense for me to go back to an office because all of my income would have went to childcare. And so this is in the early 90s and nobody was doing that, right? It's like, there was only one way to practice architecture for, and that was, in a firm. Like you went into the office, you didn't have like, you couldn't just work part-time, you couldn't work. So I can remember being at, some openings and talking to other architects. And one of the guys was like, he said like, oh, like, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm raising my kid and then I'm working part-time. And he's like, oh my God, I could never do that. I could never work part-time in architecture, and I was like, well, right.
I've definitely gotten, you don't fully understand the grind. And I was like, does it always have to be a grind? Like that in itself is problematic to me, right? The fact that in order to be in architecture, you have to invest yourself in the grind.
But that's because we're in a male-dominated field, and there is only one kind of way, right? Like men weren't having babies, right? Like we've been, it's a male-dominated field, and it's kind of this other mindset. And architecture has kind of always been like this field where people feel like you have to be dedicated. You have to do a 60-hour work week.
It's a lifestyle choice.
Yes, it becomes a lifestyle, right? So people say, they'll like ask me like, oh, what do you do for fun? And Evelyn, I'm like, oh.
Go look at architecture house tours. What do you do for fun?
What do you do?
No, but to be fair, because we do have male listeners on the podcast, I will fully admit, like, my best mentor, my best boss that I ever had in tech, male, amazing. There are some incredible mentors in architecture. Some who I've been lucky enough to call dear friend, like dear friends. I've just been unfortunate to not be able to be in their direct sunlight when it comes to working with them directly.
To me, it kind of seemed right, like also, residential architecture, right? So if people, if they're corporate architects, they've worked for a big corporate firm, they kind of look at residential architecture as kind of like, oh, you do residential, and then
really,
usually, yes. Oh, yes, definitely.
But the residential architects are the ones that win all the design awards. Like if you are in the LA market, and have clients with a certain level of budget.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of see it. And I kind of see that a lot of these, it's like Tom Kundig, they started, right? He's really known for the houses. Now they have bigger work. The firm is bigger. They've got these bigger projects. They're doing things for Nike, but again, it's the house. And Tom kind of like talks about the house as being like, that's where we can do our research, right? Like we can do all of our research on the house. It's a smaller project. We can kind of like do things that, that maybe we couldn't do.
You can get clients that are kind of like that, kind of the right clients that trust you. I do know that there's a lot of, obviously, I feel like there's a lot of struggling sole practitioners out there that have problems finding the right clients and find themselves undercutting themselves, and they are going to head with GCs because they're working at a scale that doesn't necessarily require an architectural license. So I get both sides of the coin.
Yeah. So, I don't know. What do you think is one of the reasons why? It's like less the design process or the way that we're trained. And then they're thinking that you have to use that training in order to go kind of like the corporate route.
I always wondered about the duality between like now firms, I feel more often than not are either like, we're a design first firm. Like they identify themselves as design first, which is an interesting way to identify yourself. I feel like in my head, when people say we're a design first firm, certain types of firm culture, for better or for worse, like kind of pop into my head, right? Certain types of ideas about how they would approach things kind of pop in my head, and then like, what does that make every other firm if they don't consider themselves a design first firm?
Yeah, we're the schlock firm that's turning out plans for its big box stores or something. Yeah, we're the money making firms, right? Like as opposed to the design money making. Yeah.
Nikita Merle is an amazing copywriter, right? And she's been on the podcast before, and I just like have her in my mind. It's like every architect is a designer. I don't practice architecture. I knew getting my stamp that I would never stamp anything. I did feel like I had to make it to the end of that path. But I feel like I design things. They're just not as tangible. It's just a little harder to wrap your head and your hands around what I design.
And I think also it's a way of thinking. I think of it as a way of thinking. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're designing like a large scale building or you're designing, coursework for things. I mean, it's kind of like, it's this conceptual thinking, but then it's also the follow through, right? It's not just always coming up with big ideas. It's actually building on those ideas, working out any problems that are coming up, and then coming up with this, the result of those ideas. And whether that is, a software program, or whether that's a building, hospital building or something, like, say, I think that that's kind of like where our specialty in thinking is.
No, I actually think are like, people talk about how architects are problem solvers. And my counter to that lately has been, well, everybody is a problem. Like, everybody self-identifies as problem solving, like a problem solver. I think one of our superpowers really is around implementing, right? Because even if you consider the big consulting agencies, and not to put them down, because I was definitely consider the consulting path while I was pursuing my MBA. But there's this stereotypical joke behind, like, strategic consultants. They hand over a binder of work, and that binder of work often gets shelved. And frankly, as a workplace strategist, a lot of my work that I poured my heart and soul into did get shelved. But I think there's a certain level of implementation. If you think about how every building is, in fact, a prototype, usually often a one of a kind, that is the architect's superpower when it comes to seeing projects through to completion.
What was your original vision for the practice of architecture?
Well, so it's interesting, right? And I think we have a lot more new listeners on the podcast. So practice of architecture, the business practice of architecture, started while I was in business school. And I was like, oh, why aren't we always complain that we only get an hour of professional practice through our NAB accredited degree, right? Like, only a 1 hour lecture on professional practice was required. And I don't know about your experience, but my experience in undergrad was, you open the Architect's Handbook of Practice. Every chapter is like a week during the semester, and eventually you've worked your way through the Handbook of Practice. But anyways, I was studying finance and economics and marketing and brand strategy and, true different methodologies of innovation in business school. And I was like, why aren't we learning any of these? So practice of architecture at its beginning was purely curated articles that I was reading in business schools that I was like, hey, architects, you might find this interesting. It's still a little bit of that. And I still honestly am operating on the periphery. I'm one of the foundational advisors for Women Defining AI. And there's definitely a lot more tech influence now than when it started. But it is a collection. If you sign up for the newsletter, it's a collection of, hey, you might find this interesting, and here's how it could be potentially relevant to practice. But it's evolved. It now includes a podcast. I have a community, which is a group that I think of disruptors that are really interested in different ways to approach practice. And they have more direct access to myself as what I would call kind of a fractional COO or a fractional operations person. But yeah, like, as an example, this week I found a LinkedIn post where one of my tech friends, had shared all of the interview guides for all the major software companies. And I thought about it, and I was like, architects complain about the interview process all the time.
Yes.
I don't know a single architecture firm that is, even the large firms, that's producing like an interview guide to say, like, here are the questions we ask, here's how we would like you to prepare. It's not necessarily always spelled out on architecture websites, but this is kind of what our culture is about. Like, basic things that could help candidates improve the quality of the interview. So not only you as a firm leader can get more out of the interview, but also it's just an overall better experience for everyone.
And I think that comes up so much, in the different groups that I'm in, on either, women or the mothers group. these, people are always asking like, oh, what do you guys do for this? Like, what is your HR? What is your parental leave?
There's so much we can do to like improve little aspects of the employee experience.
Yeah. And I'm always thinking like, isn't that out there? Is that not out there somewhere? I mean, is there not some standard?
It isn't. When I have free time, like I'm trying to develop at least a resource every month, but those are the type of resources that I'm beginning to put together. So one, as a very good example, one of my community's members shared out their employee handbook. They're a medium-sized firm. They're like, this is the first time I've ever had an employee handbook, but they didn't consider some things that maybe somebody who had produced an employee handbook had thought about before. So an example that I always give, for instance, and corporate world is struggling with this, like what does return to office look like, right? And I think enjoying the show. Join a community of fellow disruptors at practiceofarchitecture.com/community. Your membership helps support the production of this podcast, Practice Disrupted, and funds the creation of more resources for all of you. Looking forward to growing together. Join us today at practiceofarchitecture.com/community. Actually, some really amazing leaders out there that are like, we have a completely flexible policy. And if you look into it, like they do have a completely flexible policy, but them as a leader shows up to the office every single day from 8 to 6 or from 7 to 6. And I was like, that is great that you have written out that you have a flexible policy, but because you show up from 8 to 6 and you are the CEO of the firm, you are essentially mirroring behavior saying that in order for you to be in my leadership position and to grow in leadership position, you need to mirror that behavior. And I expect you in the office as much as I do. And it's just kind of like all good intentions, but unconscious consequences.
And, most of the people that I've like worked for, they were in the office all the time, right? They've sold their practices and they're still in the office every day as a consultant.
I think we can have a whole discussion, and I might actually bring back some ladies that I interviewed previously. I'm thinking about bringing back 4 architects and some of their leaders to talk about like what leadership transition looks like, because that's still going to be, when we talk about workforce and what the future of practice looks like, there's still so many small to medium-sized firms that have aging leadership. I just talked to somebody who's like, oh, we just finally switched over to ESOP. And then I saw another company that like, we're still in ESOP, but the owner doesn't want to sell any share. Like they haven't begun that transition.
I've heard that from people. I've heard it that they've had this whole plan in place. And then the guy, I'm saying guy because, but I mean, whoever the person is, but they've gone home for like 2 weeks on a break or whatever. And then they come back and then they're like, yeah, I don't want to retire. Like I'm going to be.
Yeah. And then another conversation, honestly, that we had in the community is these firm owners that haven't done estate planning. Do you have an estate plan?
I'm working on mine right now, right? Because I mean, that is definitely something. But, Evelyn, I've talked to some of my friends because I was trying to get referrals, and I think I'm going to go with this one person. But they're attorneys, and they haven't done an estate plan. It's like, and they have kids, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Your kids are at least, I think, of an age that are a little bit more self-sufficient.
And we had a will, like from the age that she was like 1. Yeah, a will, and like, what was that? Yeah, that was fine. But because, my late ex-husband passed away, right, we need a trust for the house.
Yeah. So I was talking to somebody who's just like, yeah, if I pass away, I guess the firm automatically goes to my wife, who doesn't have any background in architecture. And I was like, well, what does that mean for your employees? And it's not an unusual situation, because I just don't think many people think through that. And they're like, yeah, well, ownership transfers, but what does, like, from a day-to-day business, if you have employees that you're paying, does that, like, that is a lot to put on a spouse after such a or any partner after such a traumatic event. But that is something that I got taken care of, that my husband and I got taken care of, my partner and I got taken care of last year. Because in the state of California, and maybe somebody scared me into it, but they're like, if you don't have a plan and identify who your children even get temporary custody to, they go into protective service or they go into the system so quickly, and it just becomes that much harder to pull them out and get them over to the right parties. And I was like, my kids are so shy and introverted. It would be enough to lose both of us, but then to have them living with strangers on top of it, like,
yeah. Well, the good thing is I can tell you from like people that have been like wrongly accused of stuff with it, it takes several months before they actually show up at your door and try to take it away. But they would have to be taking them away from like your family would, right?
Or
like
friends. I mean, but like we have it worked out to like, these are the individuals that have temporary custody because Ryan and I have no family within the state, and to know who they will go to and how they'll be able to manage that they'll be taken care of, and that while they will be an extra responsibility, they will be less of a financial burden to that family.
I know. And Evelyn, it's funny because like I can remember when we did ours, we didn't tell anybody, right? We didn't tell anybody. And then, I think we might have, we did tell the people, but the other part of the family like just brought it up one day, and I was just kind of like putting it off. And I just said like, well, you don't have to tell the person if they've been made, if they're the custodial party. And then she was like, oh no, you do have to. And finally I just said, we already did. And then it just erupted into this huge argument. And I was like, you guys are arguing over both of us dying, and like, which is very rare anyway. Yeah, it just turns into this big thing. But yes, I think that people should get things taken care of. And, and it makes, I don't know, I just saw like some friend had said that the person thought that it was like superstitious or something to do. I was like, oh my gosh, like, don't think that way. It is making it less difficult for your family and everyone involved. Yes. Yeah.
But this goes down anyways. So I know we're a little bit off track here, but this also goes down to firm succession, firm planning, and even considering who is next in line, what happens to ownership. Heavens forbid, should something happen to the owner. That's not even succession planning. That is just business continuity planning.
Yeah. Well, and then some people, like I asked when you're doing it, they want to know what is the value of your business, right? Like for mine, they want to know what the value of the business is. And I'm like, well, gosh, I don't know. Do we have anything that like kind of says like what the value of the business is? And a lot of people, the only one that I could even get a number is that one of the people that I was on CRAN with had recently gone through a divorce. And so he had to have it appraised, and he could say, okay, I can tell you exactly what it is. But that's really not the way that you should typically be like coming up with things for your business.
These are not the things that we tend to necessarily talk about in practice of architecture. But I also think we like to be more forward thinking. How do we automate the things that are very dreary that we don't want to deal with? There are some amazing time trackers out there that, as long as you're working in some type of app, can now track like how.
I totally need that, Evelyn. I've even noticed that it is so good to have it on my phone, just as far as how much screen time. Of course, a lot of times I'm doing in my email, right? So that's like coming as screen time or whatever. But yeah, I would love to have like some type of automatic tracker.
I always want to put myself and my business in a situation where I never have to fill out a time card ever again.
Yes.
Was like one of the most freeing things, because I was one of those people where our bookkeeper or the office manager or whoever was in charge of getting time cards would always be bugging me and threatening me, holding out my paycheck, right? Because
really?
Well, yeah, on a few instances, right? If you don't get your time in, we can't. But I was definitely the one that they're like, Evelyn forgot her timesheet again. And at that, by the time that you're doing that, honestly, how accurately?
No. And Evelyn, everybody does it. There isn't anybody that, yes, everybody does it. And even my stepbrother's wife actually had to do it with a big firm. They had her doing that. And they, she was on them or sending out emails. And the head of the firm totally got on her and she broke down sobbing because he was coming back. But I was saying like, hey, that's a huge firm. Like they should have had their time cards in order to do that because like that's all about business. But I don't know why, it's like we probably, we need people to be telling us to do that already. So if it was, if it could somehow be automated, right? Like I would love to just hit a button that said, right, just have all the lists of things. I don't want to give up my brilliant ideas, right? Doesn't Slack didn't have anything like that?
Well, we don't have to keep time cards. That's why I was saying it was so freeing, right? I mean, the one thing about working on projects, like internal projects where the deadlines are set internally is like the budgets and time are just allocated and thought about.
Yeah.
In a different way. It's not T&M. It's not. So the day I started and I realized I didn't have to submit timesheets, I will never go, like, heavens help me if I ever find myself in a position where I have to track my time again. Anyways, one of the things that I've been playing around with, and people in Women in Defining AI is playing around with, is leveraging like Make or Zapier or Pipedream, which is like no-code automation software. If you get a certain type of email, so if you want to think about like a submittal email with like, or, if you get an email from somebody that's inquiring about like, hey, are you taking new clients or something, that I could wake up in the morning or I could set aside a time in the afternoon at 3 where those emails are automatically filtered through ChatGPT or Claude. Claude is better for natural language systems. And then, they respond to your email and it lands in your drafts. So you still have your eye on it before it goes out. But to have all of those type of emails that you find yourself like copying and pasting a lot of responses, or you're like, I just need a standard response to this, just like kind of done for you, and just be able to go like send.
Yeah.
Things like that.
So there isn't anything like that out there in the real world?
No, you can build it. You can build it using no code tools. I think it's just a matter of teaching people how to build it. But that's I mean, those are the type of conversations we're having in the practice of architecture community.
And I mean, I used to have to write questions for the California supplemental exam, and we would go through AHOP, and it's just like, I mean, that is one of the resources. But I mean, no, and that's fine. That won't do it. I mean, they know that it's one of the resources, and I won't give any of it. But it's just like, that was the only time, because Evelyn, I didn't even take professional practice because I was in Denmark for a year. So I had like the Danish architect, which actually which that transferred to take care, which didn't have anything to do with business here. Had nothing to do. So I had never even read AOP until I had to write questions. And then I was like looking and I was like, oh my gosh, we need a better book than that. So can you start writing that book, Evelyn? The book for pro practice, a real book.
You're not the first person to say that. I appreciate it. Thank you. I've been talking to a number of publishers about what that would look like. And I've been thinking about, spinning up a very specific group within my community focused on professional practice professors, because the nuances of what they have to cover these days, especially if you think about EDI and proper protocol to remove bias, for instance, even in the hiring process and what that looks like. There's just so much more nuance there in terms of things that you could be teaching in that 1-hour seminar. So for all of them to come together and be able to have a dialogue about, I found an amazing speaker for this, or, ask about like, how are you teaching about ethics, and the importance of ethics and what, I mean, you could even go in to say like, what is the AI overlay to ethics, and to build that discourse, but two, yes. I mean, I thought about a book, a little busy this year for a book, but it's definitely, I've been talking with different interested parties about it.
Yeah. I know somebody that's teaching pro practice, and they're teaching it like different than he said, like, yeah, this is not the way that pro practice was ever taught when he was going to school. And he's like, why wasn't it?
But the thing is, what people learn in pro practice is so dependent upon who they get as their professional practice professor. And it's so wide and varied. But that's also why I think it's just interesting to see how that varies from school to school.
And I mean, we did have a person that did program, and I knew who that architect was, and he was kind of active he was active around, in the city of Claremont by Cal Poly. And he was kind of, he had his own practice and stuff. But, we kind of like used to have like, pro practice. It's like so boring, da, da, da. And I kind of like laugh. I said, if we would have known
how
like,
important pro practice could have
yes,
been.
Or even, right, like we're all hanging out with each other in the EMV building. We should have been hanging out in front of the business school. It's like, that's what I always say. It's like, that's where we should have been hanging out. Shouldn't have been hanging out with all of us that were like in there. We're never going to get any work from all of us. We're going to learn stuff at the business school outside.
Yes. So definitely coming up on this next episode or this next season of Practice Disrupted, I do have a handful of what I would consider architecture and individuals in there. And I just finished interviewing Vardan, who is the founder of Ace Lab. And we talk about how he is a non-technical founder, which means he doesn't code, but he is also a founder for a SaaS product. So even if you have a good idea, like what are the steps to bring it to life? So those are some of the things. And some of the other things that my listeners have asked is to get back to like, can you give us more examples of what traditional firms are doing or what traditional firms are doing differently? Or, I like to think that like any firm that I bring on is like operating outside of the traditional sphere, but like essentially what are architecture practices doing differently out there? So I am bringing in a few different architecture practices. The leadership does tend to be on the younger end of things. They probably don't have succession plans in place or business continuity plans in place, but they are still like very much kind of forward-thinking firms.
Who's, oh my gosh, what is the name of? I think it's the Hive. Is it the Hive that's in Chicago?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever talked to him before or like know anything about him?
No, but they have an interesting crossover with real estate.
And he's an amazing speaker. He spoke at the CRAN Chicago Symposium, and I really wish that would have been forwarded to, he was just amazing and just kind of the whole thing. And of course, there were a bunch of naysayers in the audience, why are you doing that? I don't understand. Blah, blah, blah. But there was definitely, I was fascinated that there was definitely a way that you could become an associate. Like this was the way that you could become an associate. It was from day one, right? From day one. And if you didn't want to kind of go that way, like he's like, typically those people leave after a year, otherwise they become an associate after just like a few years or something. But just kind of the way that the structure was like really, really interesting because he's one of the only people that's kind of said, this is the way you become an associate. This is the way you can.
At the firm?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's it's what's interesting and what we're finding of the younger generation is they actually want a very clear career path, like spell it out for me. So firms that are able to provide that, I think will find greater success in ushering along this younger generation than firms that are like, kind of learn it as you go. It looks like your podcast is rolling already for 2025. You just released episodes.
Yes. I just with Marcia Body Roads. And so it's about, and she's accessibility, body accessibility. And then she just has a great outlook on life, like just very motivational and kind of like, it's like, just keep going, and kind of, yeah, just like a very positive, outlook. And so she's always like kind of posting motivational things.
No, and she gives the Mother and Architects group, right? Like amazing ADA continuing ed requirement. Like I've definitely, I think, signed up for a few of those. But anyways, more on Michele's podcast, Have You Ever Met a Woman Architect, can be linked in our show notes. And I think this is kind of a dual interview here. We interviewed each other.
Yeah.
Michele, what do you find yourself as advice that you traditionally give younger emerging professionals in the industry? And it can be anything from being a woman architect or even starting your own firm. Do you find there's anything that you find yourself saying over and over again?
I think I'm like saying over and over to people. And I mean, this is what I've been asked several times by people, like, can you mentor like women in my firm? And I kind of laugh and I'm like, well, I don't know whether you're going to want me to mentor the women in your firm, because I might be telling them something that you wouldn't want them to do. Because I would kind of, I would encourage people to be able to have a flexible schedule, be able to have these things. And they're things that I've told other people that have asked me, and they've said like, no, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, well, that's kind of what I would tell them. And I would say like, start your own firm, where you can have more control of your schedule and you can be with your kids when you want, it's like you can make more money. I mean, it's like you can put in the time that you want to. And I said, it's like, I don't think that that's going to want, I don't think that that's what you're going to want to hear,
for somebody that you're mentoring and somebody else's firm.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what I kind of, and I mean, I'm not telling people to, a lot of times people say, when do you think I could take, like, oh, I did a project on my own, should I start my own firm? And it's like, no, I said, yeah, I had a project on my own, when I was working for somebody else. The project was, they didn't want to have it in the office. I was doing it outside of the office that I was working at. And, and then I had always worked at small firms. So I was always wearing all the hats. And so that transition, to running my own firm was, I started at 29, but I already knew kind of the process, and I'd worked for some people that were really, good architects that had a good, or I'd worked for people that I'm like, I'm not going to do that, Yeah.
So my final closing question to you then, I hear that a lot, right? Start your own firm, flexible hours, potential to pay more if you have the pipeline coming in and you actually know how to manage a few things and price your work out well. Like, what are some of the harsh realities of entrepreneurship?
Oh my goodness. There's a million harsh realities. It's like you're always going to have to be looking for work. I mean, it's funny. ArchiNect, they interviewed me like during COVID, and Paul said something like, oh, yeah, she's a hustler, and I'm like, gosh, I don't want to, she's always hustling. And I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, when you're a sole proprietor, it's like, yeah, every person that you talk to is a potential client.
So then back to where this all started.
And so the small, right? It's like, I love to design. The portion of design that I get to do is very small. So if you want to be designing all the time, like, don't work for yourself. I mean, you can maybe bring other people in, but you're not going to be designing all the time. Like, that's going to be like 5 or 10% of the work that you do.
So final question, bringing this full circle back. Is it less of a grind for you to be on your own than for you when you were ever in a firm? And what's the best part about that?
It's the luxury of choice.
Hi, Disruptors. Thank you for joining us today on an episode of Practice Disrupted. If you like the content for today's show, you can find all of our past episodes over on practiceofarchitecture.com/podcast. Be a part of the conversation by joining me, our speakers, and other disruptors in our community at practiceofarchitecture.com/community. Our social media handle is Practice of Arch. That's Practice of ARCH. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to drop us a DM and say hello. Tune in next week for a new conversation on change in the profession.